Rick Sanchez once said, "I've been to worlds you can't even imagine." But what he never mentioned is how those worlds changed him over time. Tonight's relaxing journey explores the hidden emotional turning points that transformed Rick from a cold scientist into someone capable of genuine love for his grandson. From his suicide attempt after losing Unity to his quiet moments of vulnerability with Morty, we'll explore the complete timeline of Rick's emotional growth across all 5 seasons, giving you new insights into his character while the gentle narration helps ease you into sleep. What if I told you that Rick Sanchez wasn't always the cynical, emotionally detached scientist we first met in Season 1? Before he was stumbling through dimensions with his grandson, Rick was once a very different man, passionate about science, hopeful about the future, and deeply connected to his family. The journey from that idealistic young scientist to the broken, flask-sipping nihilist we've come to know is a story of profound loss and transformation. When we first encounter Rick in the pilot episode, he's already fully formed as the belching, rude genius who seems to care about very little beyond his experiments and adventures. But throughout the series, we get fragmented glimpses into a different version of Rick, one who once believed in things like love and family. In early episodes, Rick occasionally makes cryptic references to his past that hint at significant trauma. His dismissive comments about marriage, particularly in episodes like Rick Potion Number 9, suggest someone who's been burned by commitment before. The most revealing window into Rick's past comes from the Rick Shank Redemption, where we see what appears to be a memory of young Rick with his wife Diane and infant Beth. In this memory, another Rick appears through a portal, offers Rick the secret to interdimensional travel, and then drops a bomb that kills Diane and Beth. While Rick initially claimed this was a fabricated memory to fool the Galactic Federation, Season 5 later confirmed that some version of this traumatic event actually occurred, though with important differences. Rick C-137, our Rick, lost his family to another Rick, later referred to as Rick Prime. This devastating loss became the catalyst for his transformation. After the murder of his family, Rick C-137 embarked on a vengeance-fueled journey across the multiverse, hunting for the Rick who destroyed his life. During this dark period, he built his first portal gun and began exploring the infinite realities of the multiverse, a discovery that would fundamentally change his worldview forever. The discovery of the multiverse presented Rick with an existential crisis that few minds could withstand. Imagine suddenly learning that every choice you make spawns alternative realities where you made different choices. Every achievement is simultaneously meaningless because in infinite other realities, you failed. Every loved one exists in countless variations, making the specific version you care about statistically insignificant. For a mind as brilliant as Rick's, this realization was both liberating and devastating. This cosmic awareness became the philosophical foundation for Rick's nihilism. If infinite realities exist, then nothing truly matters in any objective sense. This belief allowed Rick to justify increasingly destructive and selfish behavior. After all, if nothing matters, why not do whatever brings momentary pleasure or interest? We see this philosophy expressed explicitly in episodes like Rick's D-Minutes, where Rick tells Morty that nobody exists on purpose, nobody belongs anywhere, everybody's going to die. Rick's alcoholism developed as both symptom and coping mechanism for this existential burden. The flask that's never far from Rick's hand isn't just a character quirk. It's a desperate attempt to numb the pain of his past and blur the edges of his cosmic awareness. His drinking serves multiple functions. It dulls his emotional pain, provides a social barrier that keeps others at a distance, and gives him an excuse for his more callous behaviors. In autoerotic assimilation, we see just how severe Rick's self-medication becomes when he attempts suicide after being abandoned by Unity, suggesting his substance abuse masks profound depression. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Rick's origin story is how his scientific brilliance became intertwined with his trauma. Before losing his family, Rick's scientific pursuits were likely driven by curiosity and the desire to improve the world. After their deaths, science became weaponized, first in his quest for vengeance, then as a means of escape from emotional connections. The portal gun that enables his adventures is a physical manifestation of this change. a tool that allows him to literally run away from any situation that becomes too emotionally threatening. During his years hunting Rick Prime, our Rick encountered the Citadel of Ricks, a society composed of Ricks from different realities who had banded together. However, rather than finding comfort in this community of alternate selves, Rick C-137 developed a deep hatred for them. The other Ricks represented everything he despised about himself: his arrogance, his selfishness, and perhaps most importantly, versions of himself who had not lost their families or had found ways to replace them. His contempt for the Council of Ricks reveals his self-loathing and inability to forgive himself for failing to protect his original family. After years of hunting Rick Prime unsuccessfully, Rick C-137 eventually gave up his quest for vengeance. In one of the series' most poignant revelations, we learn that Rick deliberately sought out a reality with an adult Beth, a daughter who had grown up without him. By inserting himself into the Smith family's life, Rick was attempting to reclaim some version of the family he lost, while still maintaining emotional distance through his cynical attitude and frequent reminders that this Beth isn't his Beth. The fundamental transformation in Rick's character was his adoption of the belief that caring about others only leads to pain. Every close connection becomes a potential wound, every relationship a vulnerability that could be exploited or lost. This defensive philosophy explains why Rick works so hard to maintain emotional distance from the Smith family even as he chooses to live with them. His catchphrase, "Wubba Luba Dub Dub," which Bird Person reveals translates to "I am in great pain, please help me," in his language, speaks to the suffering beneath Rick's cavalier exterior. What truly broke Rick's spirit wasn't just the loss of his family, but the systematic stripping away of everything he once believed in. His faith in science as a force for good, his belief in the significance of individual choices, his trust in emotional connections, all were casualties of his trauma and his encounter with the multiverse. The Rick we meet in the series has rebuilt himself around absence and loss, filling the void with adventures, substances, and fleeting pleasures while avoiding anything that might lead to the pain of attachment. The man who believes nothing matters shouldn't logically cling to one specific teenager across the multiverse, yet Rick insisted on having Morty by his side from the beginning. This peculiar attachment takes on a disturbing light in Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, where we learn the calculated scientific reason behind this choice. Rick casually drops a revelation that forces us to question everything about their early relationship. Morty's brainwaves have a unique property that effectively camouflages Rick from detection across the cosmos. Morty waves aren't just a convenient plot device. They're a window into Rick's utilitarian view of his grandson during their early adventures. When Rick first explains this concept, he describes how Morty's brainwaves precisely counteract his own genius brainwaves, creating what amounts to a perfect cloaking shield. This scientific exploitation reveals something profoundly disturbing about their initial dynamic. Morty wasn't chosen for companionship or even for educational purposes, but because his very neurological makeup functioned as biological camouflage. The scientific explanation also serves as a convenient rationalization for Rick. By reducing Morty to a walking shield, he creates emotional distance between himself and the grandson he's actually beginning to care about. It's easier for Rick to view Morty as a practical tool than to acknowledge any growing attachment that might make him vulnerable. This pattern of using scientific explanations to justify emotional decisions appears throughout Rick's behavior, protecting him from confronting his own feelings. We can see this callous utilization most clearly in Rick Potion number 9, where Rick's reckless experiment transforms the entire world's population into grotesque mutants. Rather than fix the problem, Rick simply locates an alternate reality where versions of themselves conveniently die, allowing them to step into their counterparts' lives. The casualness with which Rick abandons an entire universe, forcing Morty to literally bury his own corpse, demonstrates his willingness to sacrifice his grandson's psychological well-being for expedient solutions. Yet even in these early episodes, there's a fascinating contradiction in Rick's behavior. While he explicitly treats Morty as disposable, his body language often tells a different story. Watch Rick's facial animations carefully when Morty faces genuine danger rather than just complaining. There's a subtle shift, a momentary widening of the eyes, a brief change in posture, that betrays concern beyond what would be warranted for a mere tool. These animation details offer glimpses into Rick's unacknowledged attachment. The voice performance enhances these subtle moments further. When Morty expresses fear or concern, Rick's typical dismissive tone occasionally gives way to something gentler, more reassuring. These inflections aren't consistent with someone who views their companion as merely a walking brainwave shield. They suggest an underlying emotional connection that Rick himself might not fully recognize or is actively trying to suppress. This contradiction creates one of the most compelling tensions in the early seasons. Rick's insistence that Morty is replaceable versus his increasingly specific attachment to this particular Morty. If all Mortys serve the same biological function, why does Rick become progressively more concerned with protecting his Morty? The answer lies in Rick's fundamental internal conflict between his nihilistic philosophy and his innate capacity for connection. We can trace this conflict through Rick's protective behaviors that emerge despite his stated indifference. In dangerous situations, Rick often places himself between Morty and harm, a positioning choice that goes beyond preserving a useful tool. These moments reveal that beneath Rick's cynical exterior, protective instincts activate when Morty faces genuine threat, instincts that contradict his claimed utilitarian view. This contradiction reflects Rick's deeper psychological struggle. Having rebuilt himself around the belief that caring leads inevitably to pain, Rick cannot admit attachment without acknowledging vulnerability. Morty represents precisely the kind of emotional connection Rick has spent decades avoiding, yet finds himself inexplicably drawn toward. By maintaining the fiction that Morty is merely a tool, Rick can justify spending time with his grandson without confronting the emotional significance of their relationship. The Morty shield concept also functions as a metaphor for Rick's emotional state. Just as Morty's brainwaves shield Rick from external detection, viewing Morty as a tool shields Rick from his own emotions. It's a defense mechanism that allows him to maintain the emotional distance he believes is necessary for survival in a cruel multiverse. This defense mechanism explains Rick's reluctance to acknowledge any affection for Morty, despite his increasingly protective actions. When caught showing concern, Rick typically deflects with insults or by creating distance, retreating back behind the safety of his cynical worldview rather than acknowledging the growing bond. These moments of retreat often follow what might otherwise be breakthrough emotional moments, creating a pattern of approach and withdrawal that defines their early relationship. Yet even as Rick attempts to maintain emotional distance, their shared experiences gradually transform their relationship. Each adventure, each shared trauma, each moment of cooperation creates connection, despite Rick's resistance. The grandson, who began as a mere brainwave shield, slowly becomes something far more significant, a constant companion, a moral counterbalance, and eventually, a catalyst for Rick's reluctant growth. The early dynamic between Rick and Morty reflects Rick's fractured psyche, a brilliant mind capable of understanding everything except his own emotions. By reducing Morty to a scientific utility, Rick attempts to rationalize his desire for connection without confronting his emotional needs. But the very adventures that Rick designs to maintain distance ultimately create the opposite effect, forging bonds through shared experience that prove impossible to dismiss. These shared adventures might forge unexpected bonds, but what happens when the universe's most brilliant mind confronts the one equation he can't solve? For all Rick's multiversal knowledge and technological prowess, nothing prepared him for the crushing weight of Unity's departure, a moment that exposed the painful truth that even geniuses bleed when abandoned. The relationship between Rick and Unity represents one of the most revealing glimpses into Rick's emotional landscape. Unity, a hive mind capable of assimilating entire civilizations, sees something in Rick that most others miss. Not just his brilliance, but the wounded soul beneath the cynical exterior. When Unity ultimately leaves Rick, we witness something extraordinary. The mask completely falls away. What makes the aftermath of Unity's departure so powerful isn't just Rick's sadness, but the specific visual and musical choices made to convey his despair. The animation shifts dramatically from the vibrant, chaotic energy typical of Rick's adventures to darker, muted tones that mirror his emotional state. The studio deliberately drained the color from Rick's world, reflecting how Unity's absence left him emotionally colorless and empty. Most revealing is what happens when Rick returns home alone. In his garage, surrounded by the tools of his genius, Rick methodically sets up a death ray before positioning himself beneath it. The contrast couldn't be more stark. The man who can build anything, travel anywhere, and outsmart anyone cannot engineer a solution to his own heartbreak. This attempted suicide speaks volumes about the depth of pain Rick carries. For a character who constantly proclaims that nothing matters, this moment reveals that some things matter so deeply they become unbearable when lost. The sound design in this scene reinforces the emotional weight. As Rick slumps forward, narrowly missing death only because he passes out before the ray activates, there's no dramatic music or commentary, just the hollow sound of his head hitting the workbench. This deliberate creative choice emphasizes how Rick's vulnerability exists in silence, in the spaces between his usual bombastic personality. Rick's friendship with Bird Person offers another window into his capacity for genuine connection. Unlike his relationship with Morty, which began as exploitation, Rick's bond with Bird Person developed through shared experiences and mutual respect. Bird Person understands Rick in ways his family cannot. He knows Rick's history, speaks his language, both literally and figuratively, and accepts him without judgment. This makes Bird Person's apparent death in The Wedding Squanchers all the more devastating for Rick. The wedding itself represents a rare moment where Rick willingly participates in a ritual celebrating emotional connection, something he typically mocks. When the celebration turns to tragedy, Rick's reaction is telling. Rather than immediately devising an escape plan or seeking revenge, we see genuine grief and shock on his face. More significantly, this loss contributes to Rick's unprecedented decision to surrender to the Galactic Federation. For a man who has consistently outrun, outsmarted, and outfought his enemies, this voluntary surrender represents a profound break in character. It suggests that without Bird Person, without the possibility of meaningful connection, even freedom loses its value to Rick. His willingness to sacrifice his own freedom speaks to how much this friendship meant to him. These moments of vulnerability become more meaningful when we observe that they almost always occur when Rick believes no one is watching. During his suicide attempt, he makes sure he's alone. His most honest conversations with Bird Person happen away from his family. This pattern suggests that Rick's cynicism isn't just a philosophical position, but a carefully maintained facade, one he can only drop when he feels safe from judgment or expectation. The visual language of the show consistently reinforces this duality. When Rick is performing his detached persona, the animation emphasizes his confident posture, his wide gestures, his dominant physical presence. But in private moments of vulnerability, the animation style shifts. His shoulders slump, his movements become smaller, his eyes soften. These subtle visual cues help convey the weight he carries when no one's looking. What makes these cracks in Rick's armor so compelling is how they contrast with his stated worldview. A man who truly believed nothing matters wouldn't attempt suicide over a breakup. Someone genuinely unconcerned with relationships wouldn't be devastated by betrayal. These contradictions reveal that Rick's nihilism isn't an absolute truth but a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the pain of caring in a universe where loss is inevitable. This complexity extends to Rick's growing attachment to the Smith family. Despite his initial utilitarian approach to Morty and dismissive attitude toward the rest of the family, we begin to see moments where genuine affection breaks through. These aren't grand declarations of love, but small gestures. Defending Beth's intelligence to Jerry, protecting Summer from genuine threats, occasionally showing pride in Morty's growth. Each represents another hairline fracture in the armor Rick has built around himself. The musical cues throughout the series provide another layer of insight into Rick's emotional state. In moments of vulnerability, the show often employs melancholic scores that underscore his isolation and regret. This approach is particularly evident in Rick Potion number 9, where the somber background music during key scenes helps viewers understand the emotional weight of Rick's decisions, even when his facial expressions and dialogue maintain a facade of detachment. These vulnerable moments also reveal Rick's deepest fears. It's not death that terrifies him. He frequently puts himself in mortal danger without hesitation. It's not failure. He's confident in his ability to solve almost any problem. What truly frightens Rick is the possibility of caring deeply about someone and then losing them. His emotional withdrawal isn't just philosophical posturing, it's a protective mechanism born from profound trauma. The truly remarkable aspect of these cracks in Rick's armor is how they gradually widen over time. Early in the series, his vulnerable moments are rare and quickly dismissed. As his adventures with the Smith family continue, these moments become more frequent and harder for Rick to deny. While he maintains his cynical persona, the contradiction between his stated beliefs and his actions becomes increasingly apparent, not just to viewers but to Rick himself. The paradox of Rick's genius is that while it gives him mastery over the cosmos, it simultaneously traps him in a prison of his own making. While the cracks in his emotional armor reveal moments of vulnerability, his intellect serves as the ultimate barrier, a wall so high that even he can't climb over it to reach genuine human connection. The same brain that calculates interdimensional coordinates in seconds somehow short-circuits when processing basic emotional needs, creating an invisible isolation chamber where he's both jailer and prisoner. Rick's intelligence manifests as a double-edged sword in his daily interactions. When faced with a technical problem, whether it's building a microverse battery or turning himself into a pickle, his mind produces elegant solutions that border on miraculous. Yet this same brilliance falters catastrophically when confronted with the relatively simple challenge of sitting through a family therapy session. In Pickle Rick, this contrast reaches its logical extreme when Rick transforms himself into a pickle solely to avoid family therapy, a scientific feat requiring genius-level understanding of biochemistry, yet employed for the emotionally stunted purpose of dodging uncomfortable conversations. The therapy session itself becomes one of the most revealing moments in the series as Dr. Wong immediately sees through Rick's elaborate escape attempt. Her assessment cuts right to the core of his psychological defense mechanism. Rick uses his scientific pursuits as a sophisticated form of avoidance. As she points out during their session, his intelligence becomes the perfect justification for his behavior, allowing him to sidestep emotional processing by focusing on the one area where he feels absolute control. This pattern repeats throughout the series in less dramatic but equally telling ways. When emotional situations become too intense, Rick doesn't just metaphorically distance himself, he literally creates physical distance using his portal gun technology. The device that represents his greatest scientific achievement also serves as his most reliable emotional escape hatch. Uncomfortable family dinner, portal away to an adventure. Morty asking personal questions, portal to an alien bar. The portal gun becomes the physical manifestation of Rick's emotional unavailability, allowing him to vanish the moment genuine connection threatens his carefully constructed walls. Rick's dismissive attitude toward others' intelligence functions as another layer of his defensive architecture. By constantly belittling the intellectual capacity of those around him, including family members who clearly possess above-average intelligence, he creates justification for emotional distance. If no one can truly understand him, he reasons, then meaningful connection becomes impossible by definition. This circular logic serves his emotional avoidance perfectly. He can't connect because others aren't smart enough. And this perceived intellectual gap becomes his excuse for not even trying. Even when Rick encounters beings whose intelligence approaches his own, these relationships reveal his fundamental isolation. His connection with Unity, while initially promising, ultimately fails despite their intellectual compatibility. Unity, as a hive mind, could understand Rick on multiple levels simultaneously, yet even this extraordinary being couldn't maintain a healthy relationship with him. The failure suggests that Rick's isolation stems not just from others' inability to understand him, but from his own inability to sustain emotional connections regardless of intellectual parity. The glimpses we get of Rick's interactions with other highly intelligent beings often reveal a different side of him, one capable of discussing complex concepts and finding temporary kinship in shared brilliance. These moments highlight how differently Rick behaves with intellectual peers versus his family. With Unity or other scientists, Rick momentarily drops certain defensive barriers, suggesting that intellectual compatibility provides him at least a surface-level comfort that family interactions rarely achieve. Particularly revealing is Rick's relationship with his daughter Beth, who herself possesses substantial intelligence. In The ABCs of Beth, Rick acknowledges Beth's capabilities by offering her the chance to explore the multiverse, a rare moment where he recognizes someone else's potential. This fleeting connection through intellectual recognition shows how Rick's genius simultaneously creates distance and occasional bridges. Beth, as the family member most similar to Rick intellectually, experiences brief moments of genuine connection with her father that other family members rarely receive. The most poignant aspect of Rick's intellectual prison is that he built it himself, one scientific achievement at a time. Each discovery, each invention that further separated his understanding from normal human experience added another bar to his cell. While ordinary people find comfort in shared experiences and mutual understanding, Rick's unique perspective on reality makes such commonality nearly impossible. How can someone explain the weight of knowing infinite realities exist to someone who struggles to imagine even one alternative? The gap becomes unbridgeable. Despite his brilliance, Rick remains blind to the irony that his greatest scientific achievement, understanding the infinite nature of the multiverse, contributed most significantly to his isolation. By comprehending the statistical insignificance of any single reality, Rick undermined his own capacity for meaningful connection. If everything happens somewhere in the multiverse, then nothing anywhere holds special significance. This cosmic perspective, accessible only through his genius, corrodes the foundations of emotional attachment that most humans take for granted. The most profound manifestation of Rick's intellectual isolation appears during the family therapy session in Pickle Rick. Despite literally transforming himself into a vegetable to avoid emotional processing, Rick ultimately ends up in Dr. Wong's office anyway. Her assessment cuts through his scientific smokescreen. "You chose to come here. You chose to talk, to belittle my vocation, just as you chose to become a pickle. You are the master of your universe, and yet you are still locked into this drama." This insight reveals how Rick's intellect both grants him godlike powers and traps him in patterns he can't escape. Dr. Wong further diagnoses the core of Rick's intellectual prison when she observes that his relationship with work is designed to bypass relationships with people. His genius becomes not just a tool, but a substitute for human connection, a surrogate relationship that demands his attention while never requiring vulnerability. While most people must face their emotional limitations, Rick's intelligence provides him an infinite series of distractions from this basic human work. The question that haunts Rick's existence is whether his genius will forever isolate him, or if it might eventually become the key to his liberation. Could the same mind that builds interdimensional portals eventually build bridges to the people who care about him? Rick's occasional moments of genuine connection suggest that his intellect, while currently his most reliable barrier, contains the potential to become his salvation. The very adaptability that makes him the multiverse's most brilliant scientist could, theoretically, help him adapt to the emotional landscape he so desperately avoids. Nowhere is Rick's struggle with connection more evident than in his relationship with Beth. While his genius may have built the portal gun, it couldn't construct a solution to the broken bridge between father and daughter. Their relationship forms a fascinating paradox. A brilliant man who can navigate infinite realities but can't figure out how to be a present father. What makes this particular relationship so challenging that even Rick Sanchez can't navigate it with his typical calculated precision? Beth Smith represents the living reminder of Rick's greatest failure. Not a scientific experiment gone wrong, but the fundamental human challenge of balancing genius with family responsibility. When Rick returned to Beth's life after decades of absence, he didn't find an angry, resentful daughter, but instead encountered something far more complicated: unconditional admiration. This dynamic creates one of the show's most psychologically complex relationships, where Beth's desperate need for validation collides with Rick's deeply rooted guilt. What makes their relationship particularly fascinating is how Beth mirrors Rick in ways that visibly unsettle him. She possesses fragments of his intelligence and emotional detachment, traits that Rick recognizes all too well. When Rick looks at Beth, he doesn't just see his daughter, He sees a reflection of his own flaws manifested in someone he was supposed to protect from becoming like him. This recognition creates moments where Rick's typical aloofness transforms into genuine concern, particularly when Beth exhibits his more destructive tendencies. The pivotal episode, The ABCs of Beth, throws this dynamic into sharp relief. When Rick shows Beth her childhood imaginary world, Fruppyland, we witness their relationship in its full complexity. Rick designed this fantasy realm as a containment system, not just for Beth's childhood imagination, but for her darker impulses. His creation of Fruppyland reveals that, even in his absence, Rick was trying to protect Beth, albeit through distance rather than presence. This protective instinct, warped through the lens of Rick's genius, demonstrates how even his attempts at responsible parenting became twisted by his inability to simply be present. The most revealing moment comes when Rick offers Beth a choice that perfectly encapsulates their relationship. He presents the option to clone her, allowing the original Beth to explore the multiverse while her duplicate maintains her earthly responsibilities. This solution is quintessentially Rick, a technological fix for an emotional problem. It allows Beth to simultaneously stay and leave, to be both the responsible mother and the adventurous explorer. The brilliance of this moment lies in how it represents Rick's approach to fatherhood. He gives Beth freedom without having to witness or deal with the emotional fallout of her absence. This cloning solution isn't just a plot device, it's a metaphor for Rick's inability to fully commit to his family. By creating a scenario where Beth can exist in two states simultaneously, Rick avoids the hard reality of making a genuine choice about his relationship with his daughter. He can't bring himself to encourage her to stay, nor can he fully support her leaving. Instead, he creates a third option that allows him to sidestep the emotional reckoning that a definitive choice would require. The relationship between Rick and Beth is further complicated by her approval-seeking behavior. Despite his abandonment, Beth idealizes Rick, placing him on a pedestal that he knows he doesn't deserve. This creates a cycle where Rick's distant behavior reinforces Beth's need for validation, driving her to seek his approval in increasingly desperate ways. When she occasionally breaks through his emotional barriers, these moments are all the more powerful because they're so rare. It's in these fleeting connections that we glimpse what their relationship could have been under different circumstances. Rick's parenting of Beth reveals the central contradiction in his character. He's simultaneously neglectful and protective, absent and concerned. His disappearance during her formative years has left an indelible mark on both of them, creating wounds that occasionally surface in moments of vulnerability. What makes these moments particularly poignant is that Rick's guilt about abandoning Beth is compounded by his self-loathing. He doesn't just regret leaving her, he regrets who he is, and by extension, who she has become because of him. The question that lingers throughout their interactions is whether Rick sees Beth as a second chance or as a reminder of his greatest failure. The answer seems to be both. Beth represents the family Rick couldn't protect in his original timeline, giving him an opportunity to reconnect with the daughter he lost. Yet she simultaneously reminds him of his inadequacies as a father, triggering his instinct to maintain emotional distance. This duality creates the push-pull dynamic that defines their relationship, where moments of genuine connection are frequently followed by retreat. What's particularly fascinating about Rick and Beth's relationship is how it reveals Rick's fundamental conflict between protection and connection. Rick believes that the best way to protect Beth is through distance, that his presence in her life brings danger and disappointment. Yet this protective instinct prevents the very connection that Beth desperately seeks. This tension between protection through absence and love through presence forms the core of their relationship, challenging Rick's belief that emotional detachment is the only rational response to an irrational universe. As the series progresses, we see subtle shifts in their relationship. Rick occasionally drops his guard, allowing glimpses of genuine paternal concern to break through his cynical exterior. These moments suggest that despite his efforts to maintain emotional distance, Rick cannot fully suppress his feelings for his daughter. His offer in The ABCs of Beth is both a gesture of love and an attempt at absolution, a way for Rick to give Beth the freedom he feels he denied her through his absence. Their relationship represents Rick's struggle with the fundamental question of whether he can protect those he loves without abandoning them. It's a question that haunts him throughout the series, manifesting most clearly in his interactions with Beth. When he creates the clone option, he's attempting to solve this unsolvable equation, to be both present and absent, involved and detached. It's a paradox worthy of the multiverse's smartest man, and one he hasn't yet resolved. The multiverse paradox lies at the heart of Rick's character. In a world where infinite realities exist simultaneously, how does anyone find meaning? This cosmic awareness drives Rick's famous nihilistic perspective, the belief that nothing truly matters in an infinite universe. But this creates the central contradiction of his character. If Rick truly believes nothing matters, why does he consistently return to this specific family in this specific reality? The answer reveals something profound about finding meaning in an infinite cosmos. When we look at Rick's relationship with the multiverse, we see a man caught between two irreconcilable truths. The first is the scientific reality that infinite universes mean infinite possibilities. Nothing unique can exist. The second is his emotional reality, where despite this knowledge, he forms attachments to specific people. This tension creates the philosophical battlefield where Rick fights his most significant internal war. The concept of the central finite curve illustrates Rick's attempt to impose order on cosmic chaos. By separating realities where he remains the smartest being from those where he isn't, Rick essentially creates a controlled environment, a multiverse playground where he maintains dominance. This isn't just scientific curiosity. It's an attempt to establish meaning in a system that defies it. By manipulating the boundaries of infinite realities, Rick tries to create a space where his existence has significance. Of course, this control is ultimately an illusion. Even within the central finite curve, infinite versions of Rick exist, each making slightly different choices. This knowledge haunts him because it suggests that no version of himself is truly special. He's just one variation among endless possibilities. Every achievement and failure exists simultaneously across the multiverse, rendering individual actions statistically insignificant. Yet, we see Rick contradicting this philosophy through his actions. Despite claiming nothing matters, he consistently chooses to stay with a specific Morty and a specific family. He could easily jump to any reality where things might be marginally better, but instead, he forms increasingly meaningful connections with specific versions of his family members. This undermines his stated belief in cosmic meaninglessness. The psychological cost of living with multiverse awareness becomes clear when we examine Morty's experience. After abandoning their original reality and burying their alternate selves, Morty experiences profound trauma. Unlike Rick, who's had years to develop defense mechanisms against this cosmic awareness, Morty still believes in the uniqueness of individual experience. Watching him process this trauma provides a window into the emotional burden Rick carries constantly. Interestingly, Rick's nihilism functions as both philosophical stance and psychological shield. By embracing the idea that nothing matters, he protects himself from the pain of attachment and loss. If everything is meaningless, then nothing can truly hurt you. This defense mechanism allows Rick to function in a reality that would otherwise be too overwhelming to bear. It's easier to believe nothing matters than to accept the weight of infinite possibilities. But this shield begins to crack as the series progresses. Despite knowing infinite Mortys exist, Rick becomes increasingly protective of his Morty. He begins to value their shared experiences over the statistical reality that this Morty is interchangeable with countless others. We see Rick making decisions based not on logical optimization, but on emotional preference. The scientist who once abandoned an entire reality without hesitation now risks everything to protect specific people. This creates the fundamental question at the center of Rick's character. How can anything matter when everything exists infinitely? The answer emerges slowly through Rick's journey. Meaning doesn't exist despite the multiverse, but alongside it. While infinite realities make every possibility inevitable, individual experience remains uniquely meaningful to the person living it. Rick's gradual acceptance of this truth marks his most significant character development. We see this evolution in subtle ways. Rick begins to acknowledge the emotional weight of multiverse knowledge rather than dismissing it. He shows increasing concern for how his actions affect Morty's psychological well-being. He becomes protective of his specific family, despite knowing infinite versions exist. These changes suggest that Rick is moving toward a more nuanced understanding of meaning, one that acknowledges both cosmic insignificance and personal significance simultaneously. The beauty of Rick's journey lies in this contradiction. He's a character caught between scientific reality and emotional truth, between knowing nothing matters and feeling that some things do, between infinite possibilities and individual experience. This tension creates the rich complexity that makes him fascinating. He's not simply a nihilist who believes nothing matters. He's a man struggling to reconcile cosmic awareness with human connection. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Rick's relationship with the multiverse is how it mirrors our own existential questions. While we don't have access to infinite realities, we all face the challenge of creating meaning in a vast, often indifferent universe. Rick's journey suggests that meaning isn't found in cosmic significance, but in the connections we choose to value despite their statistical insignificance. Rick's evolution involves learning that, while nothing may matter on a cosmic scale, individual experience creates its own meaning. The relationships he forms, the choices he makes, and the experiences he values all contribute to a personal meaning that exists independently from cosmic significance. This doesn't require abandoning scientific truth. It merely requires acknowledging that human experience operates on multiple levels simultaneously. For a man who claims emotional detachment, Rick's inventions tell a surprisingly different story. The memory erasing device doesn't just protect Morty. It shields Rick from witnessing his grandson's pain, a burden too heavy for someone pretending not to care. It's as if Rick transfers the emotional connections he can't verbally acknowledge into the very technology he builds, creating mechanical proxies for the relationships he simultaneously needs and fears. Inventions have always been Rick's most natural form of expression. While his words might dismiss the importance of family bonds, his creations often betray his deeper priorities. The memory-erasing device featured in Morty's Mind Blowers represents far more than just a technological achievement. It's Rick's attempt to maintain control over his relationship with Morty. By selectively removing traumatic experiences from Morty's consciousness, Rick isn't simply shielding his grandson from pain. He's protecting himself from witnessing the emotional fallout of their adventures. This invention reveals Rick's complex relationship with responsibility. He's willing to expose Morty to dangerous situations but can't bear to face the consequences when they prove too damaging. What's particularly telling is how Rick organizes these memories, categorizing them by color coding based on whose fault the traumatic event was. The very existence of blue memories, those that embarrass Rick himself, shows his awareness of his own failings even as he tries to erase their impact. There's something deeply vulnerable about a man who needs to literally remove evidence of his mistakes, rather than acknowledge them directly. The interdimensional cable box offers another window into Rick's psychological landscape. On the surface, it's just an entertaining device that allows access to infinite television channels across realities. But look closer at how it functions in practice. It creates a shared experience that requires minimal emotional investment. Rick can sit alongside his family, technically spending time with them, while avoiding any meaningful conversation about their relationships or problems. The cable box becomes a buffer zone where connection can occur without the messy complications of direct emotional exchange. It's a perfect metaphor for how Rick approaches relationships, present physically but maintaining a safe emotional distance. Perhaps most revealing is Rick's spaceship and its protective artificial intelligence. The ship doesn't just transport Rick and his family, it actively protects them, particularly Summer, with a level of aggression that seems disproportionate to mere transportation needs. When threatened, the ship's AI doesn't hesitate to neutralize perceived dangers with extreme measures. This invention reflects Rick's unstated protective instincts that he rarely acknowledges verbally. The ship becomes an extension of Rick's desire to safeguard his family without having to express that care directly. It's as if he's programmed his emotional responses into machinery, so he doesn't have to perform them himself. The pattern continues with the elaborate defense systems Rick installs throughout the Smith house. These aren't mere security measures. They're comprehensive protection protocols designed specifically for his family members. Despite his frequent claims of detachment and his insistence that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, Rick devotes considerable time and genius to ensuring his family's safety. The contradiction between his stated philosophy and the practical applications of his intellect couldn't be clearer. Rick may say no one matters, but his inventions say otherwise. Even Rick's more problematic creations reveal his inner conflicts. The Me-Seeks box, with its ability to summon beings that exist solely to fulfill a single request before disappearing, mirrors Rick's approach to emotional labor. He avoids sustained responsibility whenever possible, preferring quick solutions that don't require ongoing commitment. Yet the Me-Seeks themselves become increasingly distressed when unable to complete their purpose, perhaps reflecting Rick's own hidden anxiety about his failures to fulfill his role as father and grandfather. Nearly all of Rick's inventions malfunction in ways that highlight his emotional limitations. When his creations go awry, Rick typically responds with a mixture of frustration and indifference, prioritizing immediate technical solutions over addressing the underlying emotional issues that may have contributed to the problem. This pattern repeats across seasons. Rick creates something brilliant. It spirals out of control in unexpected ways, and he fixes the technical problem while ignoring the emotional fallout. It's a metaphor for how he handles his own life, constantly addressing surface-level issues while the deeper wounds remain untreated. The pattern becomes even more apparent when examining how Rick's inventions interact with family members in his absence. His ship's protective AI doesn't require his direct input to defend Summer, suggesting that Rick has programmed his protective instincts to function independently of his conscious choice. Similarly, the house defense systems activate automatically when the family is threatened. These autonomous protective features reveal that Rick's care for his family operates on a level beyond his conscious control or acknowledgement. He's built protection into the very infrastructure of their lives. What's most fascinating is how often Rick's inventions reveal priorities that contradict his stated values. For a man who claims that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse, he expends extraordinary effort creating devices specifically tailored to his family's needs and preferences. For someone who insists on emotional detachment, his creations often serve functions that foster connection, albeit on his terms. The contradiction suggests that Rick's inventions represent not just his genius, but also the emotional expression he can't allow himself through conventional means. In many ways, Rick's laboratory functions as an extension of his psyche, a place where his unacknowledged desires and fears take physical form. His need for control, his fear of vulnerability, his desire to protect without admitting attachment, all of these psychological patterns manifest in the technology he creates. Through his inventions, we see the man Rick might be if he could overcome his self-imposed emotional barriers. Someone who cares deeply about his family's well-being and desires genuine connection, even as he struggles to express those feelings directly. Beyond the walls of the Smith house, Rick's universe expands into a network of unexpected relationships that often reveal more about him than his interactions with family. For a man who claims to need no one, Rick's emotional growth frequently comes from the most unlikely sources, beings who have no obligation to care about him, yet somehow manage to pierce his carefully constructed defenses. Take Bird Person, for instance. Their friendship represents one of Rick's most genuine and long-standing emotional connections in the series. Unlike his family relationships, which come with inherent expectations, Bird Person's stoic presence in Rick's life is entirely voluntary. This makes Rick's reaction to Bird Person's apparent death in The Wedding Squanchers particularly revealing. When Bird Person is betrayed by his bride Tammy, we see something rare in Rick: raw, unfiltered grief. Not the performative anger he often displays, but a profound sense of loss that strikes at his core. It's in this moment of witnessing Bird Person's supposed demise that we can see Rick's fear of attachment validated. This is exactly why he doesn't let people in. The pain of losing one of his few true friends confirms his worldview that emotional connections only lead to suffering, reinforcing his defensive patterns rather than breaking them down. What's particularly interesting about Rick and Bird Person's relationship is how it exists completely outside Rick's family dynamic. With Bird Person, Rick doesn't have the burden of being a father or grandfather. Their bond was forged through shared experiences that no Smith family member could understand. Revolutionary battles against galactic oppressors, wild adventures across dimensions, and a mutual understanding that requires no explanation. Bird Person sees Rick as he truly is, without the family mythology that surrounds him at home. Then there's the curious case of Mr. Poopy Butthole, whose very existence challenges Rick's typical approach to relationships. Unlike most characters who face Rick's dismissive attitude, Mr. Poopy Butthole seems to bypass Rick's defenses entirely. Their interactions reveal Rick's capacity to form connections outside his immediate family circle, though these connections often remain superficial. What's telling is how Rick responds when Mr. Poopy Butthole experiences struggles. He retreats rather than engages, reflecting his deep-seated fear of intimacy and vulnerability. It's as if Rick can only handle friendships when they remain light and uncomplicated, but the moment emotional depth is required, his instinct is to pull away. Perhaps the most bizarre yet revealing relationship is Rick's obsession with the mysterious shy pooper who uses his private toilet. This seemingly ridiculous subplot actually exposes one of Rick's most fundamental needs: the desire for genuine connection, even if it manifests in the strangest ways. The lengths to which Rick goes to protect this unknown toilet user speaks volumes about his loneliness. Here is a man who can build anything, travel anywhere, and yet finds himself fixated on the identity of someone who invaded his most private space. It's not really about the toilet, it's about Rick's yearning for meaningful interaction in a universe where he feels fundamentally alone. The emotional fallout when these relationships end or are threatened reveals layers of Rick that his family rarely sees. After Bird Person's betrayal, Rick's behavior shows a depth of loss that he typically masks with cynicism. These moments strip away his carefully cultivated indifference, forcing him to confront the reality that, despite his protests, he does form attachments. And when those attachments are severed, he feels the pain as acutely as anyone else would, perhaps even more so, given how rarely he allows himself to be vulnerable. What makes these supporting characters so effective as catalysts for Rick's growth is that they interact with him on entirely different terms than his family does. The Smith family is bound to Rick by blood and obligation, creating complex dynamics where emotional manipulation, history, and expectation all play a role. But characters like Bird Person engage with Rick purely by choice, seeing value in him that extends beyond his role as the family's scientific genius. In these relationships, Rick can't rely on his typical patterns of avoidance or dominance. He must meet these characters as equals or risk losing the connection entirely. The tragedy of Rick's character becomes evident when we examine how these relationships often end. Unity leaves him with a devastating letter. Bird Person is betrayed before his eyes. His shy pooper remains elusive. It's as if the universe constantly reinforces Rick's belief that meaningful connection leads only to pain. Yet he continues to form these bonds, suggesting that beneath his nihilistic exterior lies a fundamental human need for connection that even the smartest man in the universe cannot rationalize away. Rick's response to these relationships also highlights his growth over time. Early in the series, loss reinforces his walls, convincing him that isolation is the only safe choice. But as the show progresses, we see signs that these experiences are slowly teaching him that connection, however painful, is worth the risk. Each supporting character who manages to break through his defenses leaves him subtly changed, gradually building toward a version of Rick who might someday be capable of authentic emotional intimacy. What's particularly interesting is that many of these characters understand Rick better than his own family does. Bird Person knows Rick's language of pain when no one else recognizes it. Unity knows exactly why loving Rick is simultaneously compelling and destructive. These outsiders see through Rick's performance to the wounded person beneath, offering moments of recognition that both comfort and terrify him. While Rick's family relationships are defined by his role as father and grandfather, these external relationships allow him different facets of emotional expression. With Bird Person, he can be vulnerable about his past. With Unity, he can indulge his desires without judgment. With Mr. Poopy Butthole, he can experience simple friendship without the weight of history. Each relationship provides something his family dynamic cannot: filling gaps in Rick's emotional life that he would never acknowledge needing filled? The mirrors we face daily pale in comparison to Rick C-137's reality, where his reflection exists as countless iterations across infinite dimensions. While Rick's relationships with Bird Person and his family reveal different aspects of his personality, nothing challenges his identity quite like encountering other versions of himself throughout the multiverse. In a cosmos where infinite Ricks exist, our Rick insists on being the Rickest Rick, a declaration that reveals his most fundamental struggle, defining his uniqueness when confronted with endless variations of himself. What makes C-137 different from the countless Ricks populating the multiverse? His vehement rejection of the Council of Ricks offers our first real insight. The Council represents everything our Rick claims to despise: conformity, bureaucracy, and a willingness to work within established systems. His hatred runs deeper than mere philosophical differences, though. Each time Rick encounters the Council, we witness not just disagreement but visceral contempt, suggesting that Rick's rejection of other versions of himself stems from profound self-loathing. When Rick looks at the Council members, he doesn't just see political opponents. He sees reflections of himself that chose different paths, made different compromises. His hatred of these alternatives exposes his own insecurities about his choices and the life he's created. The Council Ricks represent organized society, structure, and a form of belonging that our Rick rejects while simultaneously craving connection. This contradiction lies at the heart of Rick's identity crisis. The intensity of Rick's contempt for other Ricks reveals his desperate need to view himself as exceptional. He frequently dismisses alternate Ricks as less intelligent or creative versions of himself, suggesting that these qualities are what he values most about his own identity. Yet this insistence on being smarter or more innovative than his counterparts serves as another defense mechanism. If he can convince himself he's fundamentally different, he can avoid confronting the uncomfortable truth that perhaps all Ricks share the same core nature. No entity challenges Rick's sense of identity more profoundly than Rick Prime, the Rick responsible for murdering C-137's family. This nemesis serves as both shadow and catalyst, representing the darkest path Rick could have taken while simultaneously providing the motivation that shaped his current self. The existence of Rick Prime forces C-137 to constantly revisit his traumatic past, functioning as a persistent reminder of what drives him forward. In this twisted relationship, we see how Rick's identity is defined not just by who he is, but by who he's determined not to become. Perhaps the most revealing difference between our Rick and others appears in his relationship with Morty. While many Ricks view their Mortys as disposable tools, easily replaced when damaged or lost, C-137 has formed a genuine bond with his grandson. Though he'd never openly admit it, Rick's actions repeatedly demonstrate that he values his specific Morty beyond mere utility. This distinction is crucial as it showcases how Rick's choices regarding relationships ultimately distinguish him from his multiversal doubles. The infamous Simple Rick wafer commercial from the Citadel provides a haunting glimpse into what might be a universal truth about all Ricks. Simple Rick is harvested for the chemical reaction produced by his brain when experiencing a memory of being with his daughter, suggesting that beneath their cynical exteriors, genuine human connection remains what all Ricks truly desire. This commercial serves as a metaphor for Rick's internal conflict, the tension between his intellectual understanding of the meaningless universe and his emotional need for purpose through relationships. The Citadel itself represents an interesting paradox in Rick's multiversal identity crisis. Created as an independent society of Ricks and Mortys, it embodies both unity and hierarchy among Rick's infinite variants. Our Rick's violent opposition to the Citadel reflects his rejection of conformity, yet his actions toward it suggest something deeper, a fear that without maintaining his independence, he might become just another Rick in the multitude, indistinguishable and therefore meaningless. Rick's struggle with nihilism extends beyond philosophical musings into an existential identity crisis. If infinite versions of yourself exist, making every conceivable choice across the multiverse, how can any single choice or characteristic define who you truly are? Rick's rejection of other Ricks' lifestyles isn't merely about personal preference. It's a desperate attempt to carve out meaning in a reality where, statistically speaking, his uniqueness is an illusion. The more aggressively Rick asserts his difference from other Ricks, the more he betrays his fear that perhaps he isn't special at all. Despite Rick's insistence on his uniqueness, evidence throughout the series suggests all Ricks share fundamental traits: intelligence, self-destructive tendencies, and difficulty maintaining healthy relationships. These similarities complicate Rick's perception of himself as the Rickest Rick, forcing him to confront an uncomfortable truth. His identity cannot be defined solely by his genius or abilities, as these are common denominators across all versions of himself. This realization creates Rick's most profound identity crisis. If not his intelligence, what makes him Rick C-137? The answer emerges gradually through his character development. It's his choices and relationships that define him. While intelligence is a constant across all Ricks, how our Rick chooses to apply that intelligence, who he chooses to care about despite knowing it makes him vulnerable, and how he navigates his pain, these are the factors that truly constitute his identity. The recurring theme of Rick's relationship with Morty underscores this point. Other Ricks have Mortys, but few develop the specific bond our Rick shares with his Morty. C-137's willingness to risk himself for his grandson, his occasional moments of growth and vulnerability, and his halting steps toward emotional honesty are what truly make him unique, not his portal gun technology or scientific prowess. What emerges from Rick's interactions with other Ricks is a portrait of identity as a process rather than a fixed state. C-137 isn't inherently more Rick than his counterparts. He's simply making different choices in how he relates to those around him. His identity is constantly shaped by these choices rather than by some immutable quality of Rickness. This understanding challenges Rick's self-perception, suggesting that his value comes not from being smarter or more capable than other Ricks, but from the connections he forms despite his fear of vulnerability. Those connections Rick reluctantly forms don't just define his identity, they actively challenge the nihilistic armor he's worn for decades. For a man who constantly preaches that nothing in the universe has meaning, Rick's actions increasingly contradict his words in ways that even he can't explain away with cynical justifications. The question isn't whether Rick cares, it's whether he can admit it without destroying the protective worldview he's built. Rick's journey beyond nihilism is most clearly illustrated in Season 3, where we witness him making a conscious decision to sacrifice himself to save Morty and the family. This moment stands in stark contrast to his repeated assertions that nothing matters in an infinite multiverse. When faced with a choice between his own safety and that of his family, Rick doesn't hesitate to put himself in harm's way, a decision that cannot be reconciled with his stated philosophy that caring leads only to pain and disappointment. This contradiction between Rick's words and actions becomes a recurring theme in later seasons. Though he continues to maintain a cynical facade, his behavior betrays an increasing capacity for genuine concern. In the Ricklantis mix-up, amid the complex political narrative of the Citadel, we catch a glimpse of Rick admitting, albeit briefly and reluctantly, that he cares about Morty more than he typically lets on. These moments of honesty, though rare, signal a gradual shift in Rick's willingness to acknowledge the emotional connections he's formed. The Vat of Acid episode provides another fascinating window into Rick's evolving character. On the surface, the episode showcases Rick at his most petty, constructing an elaborate and cruel lesson for Morty simply because his grandson questioned one of his ideas. Yet beneath this pettiness lies something more profound: Rick's investment in Morty's growth. The sheer effort Rick expends to teach Morty about respecting his ideas suggests that he genuinely cares about molding his grandson's understanding of the universe. This complicated mixture of cruelty and care perfectly encapsulates Rick's internal struggle between maintaining emotional distance and investing in relationships. Perhaps one of the most surprising developments in Rick's journey is his gradual acceptance of Jerry back into the family fold. After initially engineering Jerry's departure from the household, Rick eventually tolerates his return, a concession that would have seemed impossible for the Rick we met in earlier seasons. This shift doesn't happen because Rick suddenly likes Jerry. Rather, it reflects his growing recognition of the importance of family cohesion and his daughter's happiness. By accepting Jerry, Rick demonstrates an increased capacity for tolerance and a willingness to put the needs of others before his own preferences. Rick's relationship with Space Beth further illustrates his growth as a father. When faced with two versions of his adult daughter, one who stayed on Earth and one who went to explore the universe, Rick chooses not to reveal which is the clone, treating both as equally valid. This represents a significant evolution from the man who once abandoned his daughter entirely. In his interactions with Space Beth, we see Rick attempting to engage on a deeper level than before, showing a genuine interest in her experiences and choices. Though still awkward and imperfect, these interactions reveal a Rick who is increasingly capable of paternal connection. The season's 6th finale pushes Rick's development even further as he confronts his own fears and the implications of his actions. His introspection in this episode signals a critical moment in his character arc, suggesting that he's beginning to seek meaning beyond his nihilistic worldview. By acknowledging the pain caused by the loss of his family and grappling with the consequences of his choices, Rick takes tentative steps toward a more emotionally honest existence. What makes Rick's journey so compelling is the tension between his nihilistic philosophy and his increasingly meaningful actions. He continues to claim that nothing matters while simultaneously risking everything for the people he purportedly doesn't care about. This contradiction creates a fascinating character study of someone trapped between two incompatible worldviews. The intellectual understanding that nothing has inherent meaning in an infinite multiverse, and the emotional reality that his specific relationships hold profound personal significance. This raises an interesting question about Rick's future development. Can he ever fully embrace emotional connection without losing what makes him essentially Rick? His genius and cynicism are so intertwined with his identity that complete transformation seems unlikely and perhaps even undesirable from a narrative perspective. Yet his growing capacity for meaningful connection suggests that some evolution is not only possible, but necessary for his continued growth as a character. The beauty of Rick's journey lies not in a complete rejection of nihilism, but in his gradual discovery that personal meaning can exist within a meaningless universe. While he may intellectually understand that nothing matters on a cosmic scale, he's learning through experience that individual connections can create their own significance. In this way, Rick embodies a philosophical position sometimes called optimistic nihilism. The idea that while the universe lacks inherent meaning, this absence of cosmic purpose frees us to create our own meaning through our choices and relationships. Rick's slow steps toward meaning also reveal something profound about the nature of change itself. Real transformation rarely happens in dramatic moments of revelation. Instead, it occurs through small inconsistencies that gradually accumulate over time. Rick doesn't wake up one day and decide to abandon nihilism. He simply makes choices that increasingly contradict his stated worldview until the contradiction becomes too obvious to ignore. Have you ever wondered what exactly Rick means when he mentions the central finite curve? Tonight we're going to explore this cosmic boundary in the most relaxing way possible. As the gentle hum of the multiverse surrounds us, picture yourself floating through endless realities, each one slightly different from the last. This is the perfect backdrop for our multiversal meditation. The central finite curve isn't just a throwaway term that Rick casually drops in conversation. It's actually a carefully constructed section of the multiverse that he navigates throughout his adventures. Think of it as a cosmic neighborhood within the infinite expanse of all possible realities. When Rick fires up his portal gun and that signature green vortex appears, he's not actually accessing the full multiverse. He's traveling within this specific subsection. What's fascinating is that this curve isn't actually about giving Rick more freedom. It's actually a limitation designed to keep him comfortable. Despite all of Rick's talk about breaking free from constraints and experiencing ultimate freedom, he's actually created a self-imposed boundary around his explorations. It's like having access to an entire ocean, but choosing to swim in just one carefully selected bay. This contradiction speaks volumes about Rick's character. Beneath his rebellious exterior lies someone deeply concerned with maintaining control. The curve specifically separates all universes where Rick is the smartest being from all other possible universes. It essentially creates a comfort zone for him, a multiversal bubble where his intelligence reigns supreme. This artificial boundary gives us insight into Rick's psychology. He's created a system where he never has to face beings that might intellectually outmatch him. In every dimension he visits within the curve, he can be confident that he'll be the most intelligent person in the room. It's a cosmic safety blanket for his ego. Season 5's finale brought this concept to the forefront with a revelation that changed our understanding of the show's framework. Evil Morty's entire plan was to break free from this curve, suggesting there are infinite realities beyond Rick's reach. This was one of the most significant developments in the series because it confirmed that the multiverse we've been exploring is actually just a small, curated section of something much vaster. Evil Morty didn't just want to escape Rick, he wanted to escape the entire system Rick had created. If you listen closely to the sound design whenever the central finite curve is mentioned, you'll notice a subtle shift in the background ambience. There's a gentle hum of portal technology that connects these realities, following specific mathematical patterns and creating a soothing rhythm across dimensions. This harmonic frequency exists because these universes share fundamental similarities. They all contain a version of Rick who represents the pinnacle of intelligence in that reality. This artificial boundary represents Rick's need for control, his desire to always be the dominant force in any reality he visits. For someone who presents himself as the ultimate freethinker, this is a profound contradiction. Rick has essentially created a cosmic echo chamber where his worldview is never truly challenged by superior intellects. It's like someone who claims to want honest feedback but only asks questions of people they know will agree with them. This need for intellectual dominance shapes nearly every interaction Rick has throughout the multiverse. The central finite curve also creates a unique phenomenon where certain physical laws remain relatively consistent compared to what might exist beyond the curve. The gentle glow of stars, the flow of time, the way matter behaves, all follow patterns that make sense to Rick's understanding of science. This consistency allows for the predictability that Rick relies on when making his incredible inventions. The soft luminescence of distant nebulae and the cosmic background radiation create a soothing ambience throughout the curve, perfect for our relaxation journey. But what happens when we consider what exists beyond this curve? What kinds of beings might be even more intelligent than Rick? This is where our imagination can truly expand into cosmic possibilities. Beyond the curve might exist entities who understand the multiverse in ways Rick cannot comprehend. Beings who perceive dimensions beyond Rick's understanding, civilizations with technologies that would make Rick's inventions seem primitive. There might be realities where the very concept of intelligence is entirely different, where consciousness exists in forms Rick has never encountered. Some fans theorize that beings beyond the curve might include entities that have transcended physical form entirely, existing as pure consciousness or energy. Others suggest there could be civilizations that have mastered multiverse travel without the need for portal technology, simply shifting between realities through thought alone. The possibilities are truly endless, and that's what makes this concept so fascinating for quiet contemplation as you drift towards sleep. The central finite curve actually limits Rick's interdimensional travel to only universes where he's the dominant being, creating a cosmic echo chamber for his ego. This carefully constructed boundary tells us more about Rick than perhaps any other element of the show. Beneath his nihilistic exterior and claims that nothing matters, he's created an entire system to ensure his intellectual superiority is never challenged. It's a profound statement about insecurity hidden within seemingly limitless freedom. The mathematical structure of the curve itself follows beautiful patterns. If visualized, it would appear as a gently flowing ribbon of realities, each one connecting to others at precise points where interdimensional travel is possible. The soft mathematical harmony of these connections creates a lullaby-like rhythm, perfect for our relaxing exploration of Rick and Morty lore. Beyond the mathematical patterns of the central finite curve lies a dimension bathed in perpetual sunset, C-137, the reality that broke Rick before he broke the multiverse. Most fans assume this label refers to the main dimension where our adventures take place. But the truth creates a much more somber melody in our cosmic lullaby. This single point in the multiverse contains more emotional weight than all other dimensions combined. When we hear Rick mention C-137, he's not referring to where most of the show takes place. He's actually talking about his origin dimension, the place where everything began and, in many ways, ended for him. This cosmic address belongs specifically to the dimension where Rick Prime, the most ruthless version of Rick we've encountered, originated from. It's the dimension that set Rick on his path of interdimensional wandering, not his current home. What makes C-137 truly unique in the multiverse is what happened there, and what continues to happen there. In the episode Rick Mirai Jack, we discovered something hauntingly beautiful about this dimension. Rick created a perpetual time loop, forever replaying the day his family was taken from him. It's as if he built a living memorial to his grief, a moment frozen in time that can never progress or heal. The visual aesthetics of C-137 reflect its emotional significance. While other dimensions in the show are animated with standard lighting, C-137 exists in what appears to be a permanent sunset. This soft, amber glow creates longer shadows across the landscape, a subtle but powerful visual metaphor. These elongated shadows represent how the darkness of what happened here follows Rick across every dimension he visits, stretching across the multiverse like fingers that can never quite release him. If you were to visit C-137 and simply listen, you'd notice something unusual about the ambient sounds. The background audio carries subtle undertones of melancholy that aren't present in other dimensions. It's as if the universe itself is mourning what was lost here. The gentle rustling of leaves seems to whisper stories of what might have been, while the distant sounds of suburban life play out in an endless loop, never progressing, never changing. This dimension reveals the most profound secret about Rick: that his entire lifestyle of portal hopping and interdimensional adventure began not as scientific curiosity, but as an escape from unbearable grief. When we see Rick drinking himself into oblivion or treating everything with cynical detachment, we're witnessing the coping mechanisms of someone who's been running from C-137 for decades. The most fascinating aspect of C-137 isn't just what happened there, but how Rick responds to it. He has access to infinite dimensions. He could simply find one where his family is still alive and settle there. In fact, that's exactly what he did when he joined the Smith family we follow in the show. But he can never truly belong anywhere because part of him remains trapped in that perpetual sunset of C-137, replaying his loss over and over again. We've only seen glimpses of this dimension throughout the series, usually in flashbacks or memories. It's as if the show itself respects Rick's reluctance to return there, keeping us at a distance just as Rick keeps himself emotionally distant from what happened. When we do see it, it's always with a distinctive visual filter that separates it from all other realities. A soft focus that feels like viewing the world through tears that never fully fall. The ambient soundscape of C-137 serves as an emotional undercurrent for Rick's character. If you listen carefully during scenes where Rick experiences rare moments of vulnerability, you can sometimes hear faint echoes of C-137's unique audio signature, the same melancholic tones that permeate his origin dimension. It's as if his emotional state occasionally syncs with the cosmic frequency of his lost home. What's particularly poignant about C-137 is that it exists both as Rick's beginning and as a place he can never truly return to. It's simultaneously the foundation of his story and a void in his life. This paradox creates a unique tension in the character. He's defined by a place that no longer exists for him in any meaningful way, except as a memory he's frozen in amber. The perpetual time loop Rick created in C-137 serves as a perfect metaphor for his emotional state. Just as that dimension replays the same day endlessly, Rick himself is caught in cycles of self-destruction, moments of connection followed by retreat, and patterns of behavior he seems unable to break. The dimension isn't just a location in the multiverse, it's the externalized representation of Rick's inner landscape. Close listening to the ambient sounds of this dimension reveals subtle audio cues that mirror heartbeats gradually slowing down, creating a lullaby-like rhythm that's both soothing and deeply sad. This auditory symbolism reflects how Rick's connection to this place keeps him both alive, giving him purpose through revenge, and slowly kills him through unresolved grief. When we consider the mathematical beauty of the central finite curve as a flowing ribbon of realities, C137 exists as a knot in that ribbon, a place where the smooth flow of causality bunches up and creates discordant patterns. It's the dimension that doesn't fit neatly into Rick's carefully constructed multiversal framework, because it's the one place he can't approach with scientific detachment. The soft glow that permeates this dimension isn't just an aesthetic choice. It's directly connected to the emotional weight Rick carries. This permanent sunset state symbolizes the end of Rick's normal life and the beginning of his existence as the interdimensional traveler we know. It's both an ending and a beginning, twilight frozen in time across infinity. For all the humor and adventure in Rick and Morty, C137 reminds us that at its core, this is a story about loss, grief, and the impossible quest to outrun pain across infinite dimensions. The quiet melancholy of this original dimension creates a counterpoint to the chaos and comedy that defines the rest of the show, giving emotional depth to what might otherwise be simply nihilistic science fiction. If grief defined Rick's origin dimension, then the Cronenberg world stands as a monument to something far more unsettling: his casual disregard for entire realities. In the episode Rick Potion Number 9, what began as Morty's simple request for a love potion spiraled into perhaps the most disturbing example of Rick's scientific recklessness. A single experiment gone wrong transformed an entire population into grotesque, writhing monsters that would forever change how we view the show's stakes. The love potion disaster wasn't just another adventure gone wrong. It was the moment the series revealed its darkest philosophical underpinnings. After Rick's attempts to fix the situation only made things worse, turning everyone except blood relatives into horrific Cronenberg creatures, we witnessed something truly chilling. Rather than continue trying to repair their mistake, Rick and Morty simply abandoned that reality altogether, hopping to a dimension where alternate versions of themselves had conveniently died in an accident, allowing them to seamlessly replace these doppelgangers. This dimension continues to exist without them, a perpetual nightmare realm where humanity has been irreversibly transformed. The remaining Smith family members didn't have the luxury of escaping to a fresh reality. Instead, they were forced to adapt to their hostile new environment. Jerry, once the epitome of suburban incompetence, transformed into something unexpected: a grizzled warrior fighting for survival in a world where his wife and daughter eventually perished, leaving him alone in a grotesque landscape of his son-in-law's creation. What's particularly haunting about the Cronenberg dimension is how it fundamentally altered the show's relationship with consequences. Most science fiction would treat accidentally mutating an entire planet as the worst possible scenario, the climax of a story arc requiring redemption. For Rick and Morty, it was just Tuesday, a problem solved not through heroism, but through multiversal escape and identity theft. The nonchalance with which they abandoned an entire reality reveals the show's unique perspective on morality when infinite replacement realities exist. The sensory experience of this dimension shifted dramatically after the transformation. What was once filled with the ambient sounds of suburban life, lawnmowers, distant traffic, children playing, transformed into something alien, yet strangely hypnotic. The squelching and gurgling of transformed creatures creates an unusual audio landscape, a bizarre lullaby of wet, organic noises punctuated by distant, inhuman cries. These sounds blend together into a rhythmic pattern that's both disturbing and oddly mesmerizing, perfect for our soft descent into cosmic horror. Visually, the Cronenberg dimension evolved its own distinct atmosphere. The sky took on a perpetual rust-colored hue, the sunlight filtering through a constant mist of spores that drift like cosmic snow across the landscape. This creates a dreamlike quality to the entire dimension, where shadows stretch longer and colors seem slightly wrong, as if reality itself has been warped along with its inhabitants. The architecture remains recognizable, suburban homes and familiar landmarks, but now covered in organic growths that pulse with unnatural life. When the show revisited this dimension in Season 6, we saw how the remaining Smith family had not just survived, but adapted to their new reality. They became hardened warriors in a world drastically altered by Rick's carelessness. This follow-up reinforced one of the show's most unsettling ideas: that every abandoned timeline continues to exist after our protagonists leave it behind. These aren't just discarded story possibilities. They're living, breathing worlds where the consequences of Rick's actions continue to unfold, whether he's there to witness them or not. What makes the Cronenberg dimension truly fascinating is how it forces us to question fundamental concepts we take for granted. What exactly is home when you can simply hop to another dimension and replace yourself? Is it a physical location, a specific reality, or is it something more intangible? The relationships and connections we form regardless of which dimension we inhabit. The show's creators have commented on these philosophical implications, noting that the Cronenberg transformation challenges viewers to reconsider identity itself in a multiverse where replacement is always an option. The casual abandonment of this reality also raises profound questions about Rick's character. His willingness to write off an entire dimension as a lost cause reveals the terrifying extent of his detachment. Most people would be haunted by destroying billions of lives, yet Rick treats it as an inconvenience, a spilled glass that requires grabbing a new one rather than cleaning up the mess. This isn't just nihilism, it's a complete moral disengagement made possible by access to infinite realities. For Morty, the Cronenberg incident marked his first real understanding of what multiversal travel truly means. The realization that he could simply replace himself in another dimension forced him to confront disturbing questions about his own identity. If there are infinite Mortys across infinite dimensions, what does it mean to be Morty at all? Is he defined by his memories, his relationships, or something more essential that persists across realities? When he literally buries his own corpse and takes over that Morty's life, we're witnessing a profound identity crisis playing out across dimensions. The philosophical weight of this scenario extends beyond the characters to us as viewers. We're asked to consider whether we would continue to root for protagonists who abandon the consequences of their actions by dimension hopping. The show cleverly makes us complicit in this moral flexibility. We continue following Rick and Morty into their new reality, rather than staying with the destroyed world they left behind. Beyond the devastation of the Cronenberg dimension lies something perhaps even more unsettling. Worlds that differ from our own in just one absurdly specific way. These minor variant dimensions might seem like throwaway jokes at first glance, but they actually reveal something profound about the nature of reality itself. What happens when everything is familiar, except for one bizarre twist? These subtle alterations force us to confront how arbitrary our own definition of normal really is. The shrimp hands. Dimension stands as perhaps the most iconic example of these minor variants. In this reality, everything developed exactly as it did in our world, with identical history, culture, and technology, except everyone has crustaceans where their fingers should be. The first time we glimpse this dimension, it's played for laughs, but consider the implications. An entire civilization adapted around this biological difference, developing tools, clothing, and social customs to accommodate their unique appendages. What's fascinating about these minor variant dimensions is how they challenge our understanding of identity and adaptation. The inhabitants don't find their reality strange at all. To them, having regular human hands would be the bizarre alternative. When Rick and Morty visit these dimensions, they're the oddities, the anomalies that don't belong. This complete reversal of perspective creates a powerful philosophical question about the nature of normalcy itself. The chair dimension provides another striking example. In this reality, people don't sit on furniture. They sit on other people who function as chairs. The social structure has evolved to create an entire class of chair people who spend their lives being sat upon. This seemingly ridiculous concept actually contains deep commentary about social hierarchies and how societies normalize even the most unusual arrangements when they're built into the cultural fabric from the beginning. Similarly, in the phone dimension, people use other humans as communication devices rather than technological ones. Imagine growing up in a world where this wasn't seen as strange but was simply how things worked. These dimensions aren't just random jokes the writers tossed in for laughs. They're philosophical puzzles disguised as comedy. Creator comments confirm these minor dimensions serve a larger thematic purpose in the series. They illustrate the concept of infinite realities where every possible variation exists, no matter how trivial or absurd. This aligns perfectly with the show's overarching narrative about the multiverse and the nature of existence itself. The sensory experience of these minor variant dimensions differs subtly from our own. The ambient sounds are nearly identical to what we're familiar with, creating an unsettling sense of the uncanny valley. In the shrimp hands dimension, you might hear the soft clicking of crustacean appendages typing on specially designed keyboards, or the gentle scraping as people pick up objects. These subtle audio differences enhance the dreamlike quality of these realities. What makes these dimensions particularly suited for our relaxing journey is their inherent stability. Unlike the catastrophic Cronenberg world or the politically complex reality of the Galactic Federation, these minor variant dimensions maintain a peaceful equilibrium. The soft lighting remains largely unchanged from our own reality, casting familiar shadows across landscapes that are structurally identical to those we know, despite their peculiar inhabitants. There's something profoundly comforting about the predictability of these worlds. While their single deviation might be jarring, everything else follows patterns we understand. This creates a unique listening experience, the cosmic equivalent of white noise, where the differences create a gentle rhythm across the multiverse. These dimensions exist in a quieter corner of the multiverse, less frequently visited by Rick and Morty, but no less significant to understanding the show's philosophical underpinnings. They represent the multiverse as cosmic ocean, with each reality a slightly different wave in an endless sea of possibility. What's particularly interesting is how these minor variations completely reshape identity and purpose for the Smith family in each dimension. In the Shrimp Hands universe, Jerry might be a successful shrimp hand model rather than an unemployed advertising executive. Beth's surgical career would require entirely different techniques and specializations. Summer and Morty would navigate teenage social hierarchies where shrimp hand dexterity might determine popularity. These subtle adjustments to reality reveal how circumstantial our sense of self really is. If something as simple as having shrimp for hands can completely alter someone's life trajectory, what does that say about the foundations of identity we take for granted? It suggests that who we are is less about some immutable core self and more about how we adapt to the specific conditions of our reality. The existence of these dimensions also raises fascinating questions about evolutionary biology and adaptation. In the shrimp hands dimension, did humans evolve this way naturally? Or was there some cosmic event or scientific experiment that caused the change? The show rarely provides these answers, instead letting viewers contemplate the infinite possible explanations. When we observe these worlds through Rick's portal technology, we're given a unique opportunity to consider our own reality from the outside. The arbitrary nature of our own biological and social structures becomes apparent. Why do we have fingers instead of shrimp? Why do we sit on inanimate objects rather than people? There's no cosmic reason. It's simply how our particular branch of reality developed. What makes these dimensions particularly suitable for our relaxing journey through Rick and Morty lore is how they encourage gentle philosophical contemplation without the existential dread that often accompanies Rick's nihilistic outlook. They're cosmic curiosities rather than cosmic threats. Perfect subjects for drowsy rumination as you drift towards sleep. Those cosmic curiosities might bend our understanding of reality, but they still follow our basic rules of time. Now imagine dimensions where a single heartbeat might span decades, or where beings perceive the past, present, and future simultaneously. The testicle monsters don't just experience time differently. They see it as a physical dimension they can navigate freely, making our linear perception seem almost childishly limited. Time. That constant, reliable force that marches forward at the same pace for all of us. Well, that's just another illusion shattered in the Rick and Morty multiverse. While we're bound to our linear perception, countless dimensions exist where time flows like water, pooling in some places and rushing through others, creating realities where temporal experience varies wildly from our own. Consider the Roy, a Life Well Lived arcade game we see Morty play at Blips and Chits. In just 20 minutes of what we perceive as real time, Morty experiences an entire lifetime, going to school, getting married, raising children, battling cancer, and ultimately dying as an old man. The simulation compresses decades into minutes, raising a profound question. If your consciousness fully experiences those years, complete with emotional attachments and personal growth, does it matter that it happened in an accelerated time frame? The memories feel just as real, the lessons learned just as meaningful. This type of time compression exists not just in simulations, but in actual physical dimensions throughout the show's universe. Perhaps the most fascinating example appears in Rick's car battery, which contains an entire microverse, a civilization developing at its own temporal rate, completely unaware that their entire purpose is generating power for Rick's vehicle. These beings experience their complete lives, build civilizations, and develop their own sciences, all while mere seconds or minutes pass in Rick's dimension. They have their own dreams, relationships, and existential crises, yet their entire cosmic history might transpire during a single afternoon drive for Rick. The ambient sounds in these time-variant dimensions create a mesmerizing soundscape. Clocks don't tick with the steady rhythm we're accustomed to. In some places, they race forward with frantic urgency, while in others, the gentle movement of clock hands might take what feels like hours between seconds. This creates a hypnotic audio pattern unique to each temporal reality, sometimes hurried and sometimes barely moving, like a cosmic lullaby that ebbs and flows with the unique currents of time. Even more fascinating are the dimensions where beings experience time non-linearly. The testicle monster dimension features entities that perceive past, present, and future simultaneously. For these fourth-dimensional beings, time is simply another spatial dimension they can navigate as easily as we move left or right. They don't just remember the past or anticipate the future. They actively experience all points in their timeline at once, making our linear perception seem almost primitively limited by comparison. These dimensions raise profound questions about the nature of consciousness and experience. As one interdimensional researcher noted, particularly the philosophical inquiry, if you live an entire lifetime in a simulation, is it any less real than a life lived in the physical world? This question haunts Morty after his experience in the Roy game, as he briefly forgets his actual identity upon returning to his physical body. If the emotional connections, memories, and personal growth all feel authentic to the experiencer, does the context of that experience diminish its value? The visual aesthetics of these time-variant dimensions reflect their unique relationship with temporality. The light itself has a dreamlike quality, with softer edges and colors that blend together, symbolizing the fluidity of time. Objects might leave trails as they move, or appear slightly out of sync with their surroundings, creating a visual representation of temporal distortion. In dimensions where time moves extremely slowly, light seems to pool and gather rather than simply illuminate, creating pockets of radiance that hang suspended for what might be centuries in our perception. Some of these dimensions contain beings who have evolved specifically to thrive in their unique temporal conditions. In slow time dimensions, creatures move at what would appear to us as lightning speed, their metabolisms and neural processes adapted to a reality where a single Earth day might represent millennia. Conversely, fast time dimensions harbor entities that appear nearly motionless to outside observers, their movements and lives playing out over what they experience as normal lifespans, but which might take billions of years from our perspective. The philosophical implications of these time-variant dimensions extend beyond mere curiosity. They challenge our most fundamental assumptions about identity and consciousness. If Rick were to enter a dimension where time moves at 1,000th the speed of his native reality, spend what feels like 20 years there, and then return to find only a few minutes have passed, which experience represents his true age? Is he 20 years older in mind but not in body? The show suggests that consciousness itself might be the only reliable measure in a multiverse where time is so malleable. For the ambient-minded viewer, these dimensions offer particularly soothing contemplation. The gentle washing of temporal waves creates a meditative state perfect for drifting towards sleep. Imagine consciousness as a boat floating on these temporal currents, sometimes caught in rapid streams, sometimes drifting in near stillness, but always part of the greater cosmic flow. This visualization aligns perfectly with the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep, where time itself seems to stretch and compress in our own perception. What makes these time-variant dimensions particularly fascinating is how they mirror our own subjective experience of time. Haven't we all experienced moments that seemed to stretch forever? Or days that vanished in what felt like minutes? These dimensions take that subjective experience and make it objective reality, suggesting that our perception of time as a constant force might be the true illusion. The existence of these dimensions allows Rick to experience what appears to be centuries of adventure within just a few years from our perspective. When he mentions being gone for 20 years, after a brief absence, it might not be hyperbole, but a reference to subjective time spent in dimensions where temporal flow differs dramatically from Earth's. This explains how Rick has accumulated experiences that would seem impossible in a single lifetime. He's essentially been time banking by visiting realities where he can live decades in days. Despite Rick's ability to travel anywhere in the multiverse, there's a fascinating pattern in his adventures that often goes unnoticed. Certain dimensions seem to be deliberately avoided. For someone who constantly boasts about his freedom and cosmic mobility, these no-go zones reveal vulnerabilities that the self-proclaimed genius works hard to conceal. The dimensions Rick avoids tell us more about his character than all his drunken confessions combined. When you pay close attention to Rick's portal gun coordinates, you'll notice he rarely visits dimensions housing civilizations with technological capabilities matching or exceeding his own. These advanced societies represent a direct challenge to Rick's carefully cultivated self-image as the universe's most brilliant mind. In dimensions where multiple species have mastered interdimensional travel or consciousness transfer, Rick becomes just another intelligent being rather than the exceptional genius he needs to be. The spaces controlled by the Galactic Federation form another category of dimensions Rick typically steers clear of unless absolutely necessary. These political boundaries create fascinating limitations, even in the supposedly infinite freedom of the multiverse. What's particularly interesting is how Rick's avoidance of these areas isn't just about evading capture. It's about maintaining his personal narrative of being ungovernable. The Federation dimensions represent social order and accountability, concepts Rick finds deeply threatening to his way of life. Listen closely to episodes where these forbidden zones get mentioned. There's an immediate shift in the soundscape. The ambient audio takes on subtly unsettling frequencies that create genuine unease, almost like the show itself is warning viewers about these places. This audio design choice isn't accidental. It reflects Rick's own anxiety about these dimensions. These subtle sound cues often precede Rick changing the subject or making a joke. His typical deflection tactics when uncomfortable topics arise. Perhaps most revealing are the dimensions where Rick isn't the dominant intelligence. His discomfort in these spaces is palpable, showcasing insecurities that his bravado usually conceals. In one particularly telling moment, Rick abruptly terminates a mission after discovering the dimension contains entities with cognitive abilities far surpassing his own. His excuse to Morty about boring space politics rings hollow when you notice his unusually rushed movements and the sweat beading on his forehead. These are the subtle physical tells that betray Rick's fear of being intellectually outmatched. The visual aesthetics of these avoided dimensions are equally telling. The lighting shifts toward deeper shadows with uncertain edges, creating visual metaphors for the unknown threats these places might contain. Colors become desaturated or take on unnatural hues, signaling to viewers that we've entered spaces where even Rick feels unsafe. This visual language creates a stark contrast to the dimensions where Rick feels in control, which typically feature more balanced lighting and defined environmental boundaries. Rick's body language transforms when certain dimensions are mentioned in conversation. He often diverts these discussions with sudden. Morty's growing awareness of Rick's dimensional avoidance barely scratches the surface of what his grandfather is truly running from. The multiverse doesn't just contain places too dangerous for Rick. It contains countless Ricks experiencing every possible variation of his life. This cosmic awareness creates a unique form of depression that even the most brilliant mind in the universe can't solve, only temporarily numb with substance abuse and adventure. Imagine waking up every morning knowing that infinite versions of yourself exist across countless realities. Some versions are more successful, some are complete failures, and some have made choices you'd find unthinkable. This isn't just a thought experiment for Rick Sanchez, it's his daily reality. The psychological burden of this knowledge manifests in ways that explain many of his most self-destructive behaviors. What makes Rick's situation particularly tragic is that he can't dismiss the concept of alternate selves as a mere theoretical possibility. He's encountered them, spoken with them, fought against them, and even governed alongside them. Each encounter serves as a mirror reflecting different aspects of himself that he might prefer to ignore. When Rick looks at another version of himself, he's forced to confront not just who he is, but all the possibilities of who he could have been or might become. The existence of the Council of Ricks perfectly encapsulates this existential nightmare. This wasn't just some bureaucratic organization that Rick battled against. It was a physical manifestation of his most profound identity crisis. Imagine walking into a room filled with versions of yourself, each one believing they've made the optimal choices in life, yet all ending up in essentially the same place. The council represented a cosmic joke at Rick's expense. No matter how unique or rebellious he believes himself to be, he's simultaneously one of countless identical beings making predictable choices. The show's visual storytelling reinforces this isolation in subtle ways that enhance our relaxing journey through Rick's psychology. Notice how the lighting in scenes focusing on Rick's emotional state often isolates him within the frame, creating visual shadows that separate him from other characters. Even in crowded rooms, these lighting techniques create the impression that Rick exists in his own emotional bubble, disconnected from those around him despite being physically present. It's a brilliant artistic choice that visually represents his existential loneliness. Surrounded by infinite versions of himself across the multiverse, yet fundamentally alone. This awareness of infinite selves creates a unique form of depression that manifests throughout the series. Rick's substance abuse isn't just a character quirk or comedic device. It's a desperate attempt to quiet what must be an overwhelming mental burden. When Rick drinks from his flask, he's not just numbing ordinary pain. He's trying to silence the cosmic awareness that comes with multiversal knowledge. Each sip temporarily quiets the infinite voices of possibility that must constantly whisper in his mind, reminding him of every path not taken and every mistake repeated across countless realities. The ambient soundscape that accompanies Rick throughout the series subtly reinforces this theme. Listen carefully to scenes where Rick is alone with his thoughts, and you'll notice faint echoes in the background audio, as if the actions and voices of his alternate selves create ripples that reach across dimensions. These subtle audio cues create a soothing but melancholic atmosphere, perfect for our relaxing exploration of Rick's cosmic burden. What makes this psychological weight even more interesting is how it manifests in Rick's philosophical outlook. His often repeated nihilistic statements aren't just edgy dialogue. They're the natural conclusion of someone who understands the multiverse on a fundamental level. If every possible decision is being made somewhere by another version of yourself, what meaning can any single choice actually have? This recognition destroys the concept of free will in a way that most minds couldn't bear to contemplate. For Rick, the question isn't, "What should I do?" but rather, does anything I do actually matter when infinite other Ricks are making every other possible choice? The creators of the show have explicitly acknowledged that Rick's mental health struggles are a core aspect of his character. These aren't simply played for laughs, but designed to reflect the show's exploration of existential themes and the psychological weight of multiversal awareness. Rick's depression isn't just about personal trauma or family issues, though those certainly contribute. It's about the cosmic awareness that comes from truly understanding one's place in an infinite multiverse. Perhaps most poignantly, Rick's awareness of infinite selves creates a paradoxical form of loneliness that's difficult for anyone else to comprehend. He's simultaneously the least alone person in existence, surrounded by infinite versions of himself, and the most profoundly isolated. No one else can truly understand his experience because no one else carries the same burden of cosmic awareness. Even when he encounters other Ricks, their shared knowledge creates competition rather than connection, as each Rick must confront the possibility that another version might be more Rick than themselves. The soft ambient sounds we hear when Rick conducts his experiments alone in the garage take on new meaning when viewed through this lens. The gentle bubbling of chemicals, the soft hum of advanced technology, and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment create a soothing audio landscape that masks Rick's internal turmoil. Science becomes both his greatest achievement and his most effective distraction, a way to temporarily focus his brilliant mind on concrete problems rather than the abstract horror of infinite existence. This existential burden also explains why Rick seems to form genuine attachments, despite his claims that nothing matters. His relationship with Morty, while complicated and often toxic, represents something unique in a multiverse of infinite repetition. While there are countless Ricks and Mortys, the specific bond between any particular pair creates a small point of meaning in an otherwise meaningless cosmos. These relationships don't solve Rick's existential crisis, but they provide moments of genuine connection that temporarily alleviate the weight of infinite awareness. When we see Rick gazing up at the stars during rare moments of vulnerability, the typical ambient sounds of the universe seem to quiet around him. These moments of cosmic contemplation are rendered more powerful by their rarity, brief windows into the emotional life of someone who carries the weight of infinite selves. The gentle twinkling of distant stars creates a perfect audio backdrop for these quiet moments of reflection, inviting us to contemplate alongside him the vastness of existence and our place within it. As Rick silently contemplates the stars above, another transformation occurs right beside him, one that happens not through cynical resignation but wide-eyed adaptation. The evolution of Morty Smith from terrified passenger to dimensional navigator represents perhaps the most profound character development in the entire series. When we first meet Morty, he's a stammering, anxiety-ridden teenager whose introduction to the multiverse is less than gentle. Remember those early adventures? Morty's wide eyes and panicked breathing spoke volumes about his mental state. A normal kid suddenly thrust into a reality where nothing made sense anymore. What's fascinating about Morty's multiversal education is how fundamentally different it is from Rick's. While Rick uses his cosmic knowledge as a shield against emotional vulnerability, Morty processes each new reality as a growth experience. Every dimension becomes another classroom, every alien encounter another lesson. The curriculum isn't gentle, but Morty proves to be a surprisingly adaptable student. The encounters with alternate versions of himself have been particularly transformative for Morty's sense of identity. Meeting evil Morty didn't just frighten him, it opened questions about his own potential and the paths his life could take across infinite realities. These interactions have pushed him to evolve from that naive teenager into someone capable of making increasingly confident decisions about his place in the cosmos. Each confrontation with another Morty variant offers him a mirror that reflects different possible futures. Listen closely to the sound design that accompanies Morty throughout the series. It tells its own story of growth. In early episodes, Morty's sonic landscape is dominated by startled gasps, screams, and panicked breathing. The audio tracks his emotional state as he's thrown into one terrifying situation after another. But as seasons progress, those same audio cues evolve. His breathing becomes more measured, his reactions more controlled. It's as if the very soundscape around him has adapted to his growing comfort with the chaotic nature of the multiverse. The visual storytelling around Morty follows a similar progression. Early episodes placed him in harsh, exposing light that emphasized his vulnerability and confusion. This lighting choice made him appear small and unprepared for the cosmic horrors he was facing. But gradually, the lighting around Morty has shifted to a softer glow, representing his increasing acceptance of multiversal concepts and his place within them. These subtle visual cues track his internal journey from frightened passenger to active participant. One of the most telling signs of Morty's growth comes in Season 5, where we see him beginning to assert his independence by making his own multiversal decisions. There are moments where he actually corrects Rick on interdimensional protocols or chooses paths different from what his grandfather suggests. These aren't just random acts of teenage rebellion. They represent Morty developing his own relationship with the multiverse, one that might ultimately be healthier than Rick's nihilistic approach. What makes Morty's journey so compelling is that his understanding isn't purely intellectual like Rick's. It's emotional and intuitive. He doesn't comprehend the mathematical formulas behind portal technology or the quantum mechanics of parallel dimensions, but he grasps something perhaps more important: how to maintain his humanity while traveling between worlds where the very concept of humanity might be meaningless. The show's creators have described Morty's journey as a cosmic coming-of-age story, illustrating how his understanding of the multiverse evolves from fear to acceptance and even appreciation. This isn't just character development. It's a fundamental shift in worldview that challenges how we might respond if suddenly confronted with infinite possibilities. Would we break under that knowledge like Rick, or adapt and grow like Morty? There's something especially poignant about watching Morty's reactions to the multiverse slowly change from horror to wonder. Early episodes show him physically recoiling from alien environments, but later seasons capture moments where he pauses to appreciate the beauty of strange new worlds. His eyes widen, not in fear, but in awe at cosmic vistas that once would have terrified him. It's as if the multiverse itself has gradually revealed its gentler aspects to him as he's learned to approach it with curiosity rather than dread. The relationship between Morty and the concept of home has transformed dramatically throughout the series. After the Cronenberg incident forced him to abandon his original dimension, Morty had to reconcile with the idea that home was no longer a fixed location but a portable concept. This realization initially destabilized his sense of self, but eventually gave him a freedom that Rick, for all his technical mastery of interdimensional travel, has never achieved. Morty carries his identity with him across dimensions, while Rick perpetually runs from his. The quieter moments between adventures reveal just how profound Morty's adaptation has been. Watch closely during scenes where the family returns from dimension hopping. While Rick immediately begins planning the next escape, Morty often takes a moment to reorient himself, a subtle ritual that helps him maintain psychological continuity across infinite realities. These small gestures speak volumes about the different ways grandfather and grandson process their cosmic awareness. Most compelling is how Morty's multiversal education has actually made him more empathetic rather than less. Unlike Rick, who uses the infinite nature of reality as an excuse for moral relativism, Morty has somehow maintained his ethical compass despite knowing that every decision branches into infinite outcomes. Perhaps this is the true miracle of Morty's journey. Not just that he's survived the cosmic horrors Rick exposes him to, but that he's preserved his humanity in the face of a reality that constantly threatens to render it meaningless. The swirling green portal that serves as Rick's doorway between dimensions isn't just an iconic visual. It represents something that exists at the fascinating intersection of science fiction and theoretical physics. What if I told you that the hypnotic emerald glow might be more scientifically plausible than you think? The soothing qualities of that gentle vortex might explain why so many viewers find themselves mesmerized whenever Rick casually tears open reality with a flick of his portal gun. The soft green glow of these interdimensional gateways serves a purpose beyond aesthetic choice. In theoretical physics, creating stable wormholes would require what scientists call exotic matter. Particles with negative energy density that could counteract the natural tendency of wormholes to collapse instantly. This exotic matter would likely emit radiation in the visible spectrum, and that distinctive green color we see might represent the visual manifestation of this theoretical substance, actively maintaining the portal's stability as it bridges 2 points in space-time. When we observe characters stepping through these portals, there's often a moment of hesitation, a brief acknowledgement of the extraordinary physics at work. In one particularly reflective moment, Morty described the sensation as like being gently disassembled and reassembled at the atomic level. This seemingly throwaway line actually connects to real quantum teleportation concepts, where information about particles is transmitted rather than the particles themselves. The fluid-like surface of Rick's portals suggests something similar, a quantum state where matter exists simultaneously in both the origin and destination dimensions until observation collapses the waveform. The portal technology creates more than just visual fascination. Have you ever noticed the gentle humming sound that accompanies these dimensional gateways? This ambient audio signature bears remarkable similarity to cosmic microwave background radiation, the residual energy left over from the Big Bang that permeates our universe. This white noise quality might explain why viewers find the portal sequences so soothing, as they're essentially listening to a harmonized version of the universe's oldest song, remixed through Rick's technology. What makes portal science particularly fascinating is how it manages to bend rather than break the laws of physics. Einstein-Rosen bridges, the theoretical construct that most closely resembles Rick's portals, don't actually violate physical laws but instead exploit loopholes within them. These passages would theoretically connect distant points in space-time through a shortcut that exists outside conventional three-dimensional space. The mathematics behind this concept are complex, but essentially describe a folding of reality, bringing two points together by warping the dimensional fabric between them. Rick's portals don't just connect to identical universes with minor variations. They create temporary bridges between quantum realities that might operate under entirely different physical constants. This raises interesting questions about how the portal technology accounts for these differences. The fluid-like nature of the portal surface might serve as a transition zone, a buffer where the physical laws of one dimension gradually blend into those of another, preventing catastrophic reactions when matter passes between incompatible realities. The portal gun itself contains an engineering miracle that's easy to overlook. Despite being small enough to fit in Rick's lab coat, it manipulates energies on a cosmic scale. This suggests the device might function more as a key than a power source, perhaps tapping into some underlying quantum field that permeates all realities. The fact that portal fluid serves as its fuel rather than conventional energy sources hints that interdimensional travel requires substances that exist outside standard physical classification. When characters move through portals, they experience a momentary slowing of perception, a brief stretching of consciousness as they transition between realities. This temporal distortion might represent the mind processing a quantum state where the traveler exists in multiple locations simultaneously. The brain, evolved to process linear time in a single reality, would need a moment to reconcile this paradoxical state, creating that dreamlike quality of portal transit that viewers find so captivating. Most fascinating is how the portal technology maintains stability despite connecting realities with potentially incompatible physical laws. Theoretical physics suggests that attempting to connect universes with different fundamental constants would create catastrophic energy releases at the connection point. Rick's portals somehow regulate this exchange, perhaps creating a gradient of physical laws across the portal surface. This careful balancing act would explain the portal's constantly shifting surface. We're witnessing active adjustments maintaining dimensional harmony. The science behind Rick's portal technology might also explain why it creates such a calming visual and auditory experience for viewers. The mathematics describing wormholes follow patterns resembling those found in natural systems like flowing water or growing plants. Patterns our brains are evolutionarily programmed to find pleasant. Combined with the gentle humming that mimics cosmic background radiation, portals essentially speak to our senses using the universe's most fundamental languages. Occasionally, we see Rick make adjustments to his portal gun when traveling to particularly exotic dimensions. These calibrations likely represent adjustments to account for different physical constants in the target reality. The fact that he can make these adjustments so quickly suggests an intuitive understanding of multiversal physics that goes beyond formal equations. A master musician who can tune his instrument by ear rather than using a reference note. The fact that only Ricks across the multiverse have successfully developed portal technology suggests the science behind it requires a specific intuitive leap that transcends conventional physics. This mirrors how major breakthroughs in our own scientific history often came through intuitive insights rather than incremental progress. Einstein's thought experiments or Newton's apple moment. Portal science represents the ultimate unification theory, connecting not just forces within a universe but the universes themselves. Beyond the mathematical brilliance required for interdimensional travel lies a reality that even Rick approaches with reverence, a dimension that resonates at precisely the frequency of the human mind during its deepest, most restorative sleep. While Rick has mastered the art of surfing chaotic multiversal currents, this particular dimension stands apart from all others as a place he visits only rarely, not because it poses danger, but because of the profound vulnerability it induces. This realm, which dedicated fans sometimes refer to as the Dream Realm, exists as a cosmic anomaly where the very fabric of reality vibrates at a frequency that perfectly aligns with human brainwaves during the deep sleep cycles. Unlike other dimensions that Rick approaches with scientific curiosity or strategic caution, This one seems to demand a different kind of preparation, a willingness to temporarily surrender the emotional armor he so carefully maintains. What makes this dimension truly unique isn't just its calming properties, but the complete sensory experience it creates. The ambient soundscape consists of gentle waves lapping against shores made of something resembling cosmic sand. Not quite solid, not quite liquid, but somehow perfectly suited to absorb and transmit sound waves that induce immediate relaxation. Crystal trees with translucent branches create a soft rustling that harmonizes with distant melodies that seem to emanate directly from the stars themselves. These sounds aren't random, but form complex patterns that neurologically induce theta and delta brainwaves associated with deep, restorative sleep. The visual experience complements the auditory one perfectly. The light that bathes this dimension has qualities unlike any other reality in the multiverse. Soft blues and purples dominate the color spectrum, but these aren't just pleasant hues. They actually seem to absorb anxiety and stress upon contact with the visitor's visual cortex. The effect is immediate and profound, a natural meditative state that requires no training or practice to achieve. Even Rick, with his hyperactive mind and constant internal calculations, finds his thoughts slowing and organizing themselves when bathed in this light. Time itself behaves differently in this tranquil corner of the multiverse. What feels like mere moments in other dimensions stretches into hours of restoration here. This temporal anomaly isn't the result of relativity or quantum effects as we understand them. It's as if the laws of physics themselves have been rewritten to prioritize healing and renewal. This unique property allows Rick rare moments of emotional processing that would be impossible in the frantic pace of his normal existence. The memories and traumas that drive him across countless realities become manageable here, temporarily freed from their sharp edges. The inhabitants of this dimension are perhaps its most fascinating aspect. Unlike beings from other realities who communicate through language, technology, or telepathy, these entities share thoughts and feelings through what can only be described as emotional resonance. When visitors enter their presence, they experience a warm mental embrace, a sensation of being understood, completely without judgment. This shared consciousness isn't invasive, but feels remarkably natural, as if remembering something long forgotten rather than experiencing something new. What's particularly noteworthy is Rick's behavior in this dimension. The man who prides himself on emotional detachment and cynical superiority becomes uncharacteristically vulnerable here. We see him lowering defenses that remain firmly in place even in the most extreme circumstances elsewhere. Something about this dimension's unique properties temporarily dissolves the psychological barriers he's constructed over decades of interdimensional trauma. In one rare visit captured on screen, Rick actually smiled without irony or sarcasm, an expression so uncommon that Morty noticed it immediately. Scientists within the show's universe have theorized that this dimension's properties might stem from its position relative to the central finite curve. While most accessible dimensions exist within certain parameters of physical laws, this one appears to operate at the very edge of those boundaries, incorporating elements from beyond in ways that create perfect harmony rather than chaos. The physics of this dimension don't just allow for tranquility, they actively promote it at the subatomic level. The landscape itself contributes to the calming effect. Unlike the harsh geometry of cityscapes or the random patterns of wilderness in other dimensions, the terrain here follows mathematical patterns that human brains instinctively recognize as beautiful and soothing. Gentle hills flow into valleys without sharp transitions. Bodies of water reflect the soft light without glare. Even the vegetation grows in spirals and curves that mirror the golden ratio, creating a visual symphony that registers as deeply familiar and comforting to human perception. Despite having infinite dimensions at his disposal, Rick returns to this one specifically when he requires true rest, not just physical recovery, but psychological renewal. The dimension serves as a counterpoint to the nihilism that typically characterizes his worldview. Here, even Rick can't maintain his belief that nothing matters, as the very physics of the place refute that notion, demonstrating that peace and harmony are not just possible but can be woven into the fundamental nature of reality itself. For creatures like humans, who navigate existence primarily through contrast and conflict, This dimension offers a profound alternative perspective. It suggests that in a multiverse of infinite possibilities, perfect tranquility isn't just a temporary state, but can be the fundamental organizing principle of an entire reality. The laws that govern this dimension aren't built around competition or entropy, but around harmony and restoration. What this dimension ultimately reveals about the multiverse is that peace isn't merely the absence of conflict, but can be an active force in its own right. One powerful enough to temporarily transform even the most guarded and cynical mind in existence. In all his travels through countless realities, Rick has never found another dimension quite like this one, where the very atoms themselves seem to whisper reassurance rather than indifference. There's something genuinely comforting about the multiverse concept in Rick and Morty, especially as we drift towards sleep. The show suggests that if infinite possibilities exist, then somewhere, everything works out perfectly. A reflection of our own anxieties about the paths not taken in life. This cosmic perspective offers a unique form of peace. Whatever mistakes we've made, whatever opportunities we've missed, in some reality we made different choices. As Rick and Morty journey through countless dimensions, they mirror how our sleeping minds navigate dreamscapes, processing our experiences and seeking meaning. Our subconscious creates its own multiverse each night, where normal rules bend and new possibilities emerge. So as your consciousness grows heavier, imagine yourself gently floating through your personal multiverse of dreams, dimensions where you're both the traveler and the creator. In this infinite sea of possibilities, perhaps tonight's dreams will carry you to the perfect reality your waking mind has been searching for.